Hey everyone, it's ZombieGrub here with feardragon, those people you sometimes see in Burbank casting, although I guess not anymore.
Or maybe.
I mean, yep, I mean, there's still something there. Anyways, hi everyone, I'm here interviewing feardragon while we're at BlizzCon 2019. It's Thursday actually, so it's not quite BlizzCon yet, but we are all prepared. We got our badges, we got our statues. Horde, apparently. We've been designated Horde despite being the two people who actually play Alliance.
Yeah, like the only two people that I can even think of.
Legitimately. Yeah. Everyone else plays Horde. Anyways, that's fine. And while we're super excited to be at BlizzCon, I'm also super excited to interview my good friend feardragon, which I had to admit to being his friend on his interview. So, yeah. Now I guess I'll just go with it. Don't have a ton of actually pre-planned, to be honest, so it's going to be a bit loosey-goosey. So, do you want to go serious first or super memey first?
Hit me with the memes. Hit me with the memes.
Okay, so what esport personality do you have a crush on?
Day 9. Like, was that even like a question? Oh my god.
That was actually really fast.
I mean,
that makes sense.
You know this one. Like, Day 9 for me was the guy that, like, when I was about to say when I was growing up, but okay, it's not that far back. But like in 2009 or so, when he started doing the dailies and everything, like I used to watch all of his stuff, and then I watched I've seen literally every single daily he's done, and I still watch a lot of his stream and everything.
That is pretty dedicated. I
Yeah.
don't remember that part.
I mean, he's honestly like he's probably one of the biggest reasons I'm also even like into at this level of StarCraft commentary, because I remember like when I wanted to get in commentary, I approached him in 2011 and I was like, "Hey, how do I get into casting?" And he like gave me some kind of like a couple of goals or like a 30-day plan, and then I kind of went for that. Have I never told you this?
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay, yeah.
I think
it might just be one of those things where we always seem to ignore 40% of what the other person says. Yeah.
Close enough,
Yeah.
right? Anyways, so I know how much Day 9 actually means to you, so let's actually run with that. What was your impression when everyone kind of started to turn on all these personalities who were either directly abandoning ship, like actually being like, yeah, it's my last StarCraft cast, see you guys later, and the ones who kind of just like smoothly just, stop doing as much, which Day 9 falls into the latter category.
Yeah.
What were your opinions on, I know your opinions on the actual act of doing so, and we kind of share the same opinions on those, but what about the community reaction to all that?
I really dislike it. Like, I actually think Late Total Biscuit had a kind of like the philosophy that I've really adopted in a lot of it, which is content creators, and of course I have a stake in this, right? Because content creator, but like content creators don't owe their audiences like more than their content. Obviously, there's like some moral ethics and everything involved with like how you produce your content and whatnot. But like beyond that, it's not like, oh, you're owed the next video, you're owed the next cast, you're owed like this long-term thing. And that's why it's really dangerous when community starts to like obsess or kind of like fall too in love with the person as opposed to like the content. Because I think then that's when you develop those like parasocial relationships. And that's what I think a lot of the community develops, these like feelings like they've been abandoned, or like feelings like they were screwed over or like wronged in some way. I actually think it comes a lot from those kind of parasocial relationships where people think of it as like that the relationship in the like there is something owed that is no longer being delivered. So like I really hated the community's reaction to a lot of it, both in like the more obvious cases where like I think the community has come around, like Day 9, like God, I obviously again I have a stake in this. I literally just said he was my esports crush. But like that guy still loves StarCraft. I still see him in like StarCraft 2 streams and like Brood War streams and everything. But even people like Husky, it's like obviously it would have been nice. It would have been better PR wise to like have announced and say that he was going to leave, but he didn't owe anyone anything, in my opinion.
Okay, that's fair. But so what do you think can be done to help that when Twitch and just streaming in general, but also the way we have to come up here? No one's getting loans to build an entertainment company or a business. They are literally doing it enough that they start to actually consider making themselves a business. And in that process of moving forward, going up in the world, you inevitably have to be like, yeah, you guys are investing in me. It is me. This is the business, sure, but I shouldn't probably have done that. But that's what it is. So, I mean, is it actually true to say that they don't owe anyone anything until they've reached a certain point where it's more of like a whole, group of people, which like Day 9 TV eventually became, like actually a ton of people. But as the front guy, the one who's literally called Day 9 and always on screen, it still he still holds the whole, like, I know Day 9. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people still actually think I deserve Day 9's time. And Day 9 has actually even talked about interacting with fans, right? On the Tastosis podcast, where he actually has said that he feels like he does owe them at least a portion of his time for how much they supported him. So do you think that he agrees with your own philosophy about, people's reactions to the community, or people leaving the community? Do you think that entirely, like, he's in the wrong or he's in the right? Do you think that he could do anything more to, like, depersonalize himself, or that he should?
That's actually a fair question, and a fair couple of points, because, like, I think to touch back on something you said earlier, which was, I guess, like, the idea that the community is investing into a lot of these people. I do agree with that to an extent, but the same way I would say, like, if there were, let's say, like, a local mom and pop shop or something, and you do patronage of, like, your business, like, I don't know, a bakery opens up or something, and you go there really often. If you're one of the early adopters or something, they might feel, like, appreciation toward you, like, supporting them initially. But I would say it's unfair to say that, like, the bakery or that mom and pop shop owed you something. And I feel like the kind of relationship that you're describing is, which I do think there is some justification for this, that kind of relationship you're describing is almost as though, like, there were investors who gave them, like, seed money to start up the bakery and everything, or, like, to progress. So I do see that kind of viewpoint, but I don't know if I fully agree that, like, it should be considered that way, because there is a transaction going on, as opposed to, like, investors will come in and invest. As for the Day 9 part, I don't know how he sees it. The way I see it, or, like, at least the way I interpreted when he says that kind of stuff, is he's at an event. It's like the same way that I think that Day 9 is probably such an unbelievably nice person that he would still give people, like, or a lot of fans, like, the time of day, and he would give them a lot of time and attention, even in a completely random circumstance. But a lot of those situations I think he was describing were at events where he's been paid and hired to be there. So I would, at least personally, the way I would say it is, if you met him, like, when he's at the grocery store or something, and, like, there isn't that kind of contextualized setting, I would actually say I don't think he actually owes it to anyone to, like, go interact. But at, like, those kind of settings where he's at the event, even if it's not quite in the job description, I think that it's something somewhat implied by, like, you're there and you're kind of also there to interact a little bit.
Okay, I get that point. Like, almost the hiring fee also includes, like, being, courteous to all your fans and stuff.
Yeah, kind of. I think that it gets, I get into, like, very thin ice, not in terms of the danger, like, to myself or anything, but thin ice with my argument there, because I do think, like, it becomes a little bit ambiguous. I definitely agree with that. The one thing I will say that, like, specifically I think Total Biscuit really pushed for was that it's actually not so much just the ownership of the, like, audience to be very cautious about this, but actually the content creators. There are, like, things that a lot of content creators do that encourage these kind of, like, parasocial relationships, where it does make it feel like there's, like, a buy-in, and that they are, like, they're investors, not just like customers. So it's a really dangerous line to walk. And I think an example I could use, which I don't mean to use as, like, a call out for anyone, but, like, when streamers have things that are, like, very unambiguously, like, pay for my water bill, and, like, a little support thing, it's like, this makes me feel like I'm sponsoring you if I donate, not that I'm, like, contributing in, like, my own kind of way.
No, the whole, like, putting your bills up for display is actually quite controversial. Some people actually really appreciate it, because that means that you're not spending it on, hookers. And other people, think that it makes it kind of weird, like, you are, like, now their sponsor or something like that. But let's bring it down to just, like, Twitch and live streaming in general. I guess we got to be more broad when we say live streaming, now that Mixer has picked up a bunch of people. But the main difference, it feels like, when it comes to your business as a human being, as a celebrity, quote unquote. And the difference of like a mom and pop shop or any other type of stores, there's actually transactions that happen. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems that quickly arose and just like everyone accepted from Twitch was that it was no longer something where you felt like you were delivering a product and were being paid by the people who weren't there. Like you're being paid by people who like you. Mm-hmm. You're no longer being paid by X people way out in the world, sponsors. The ads gave you money. You didn't need to feel connected. Idris did not care if he had a bunch of subs. He was actually making a ton of money from ads. But now it's just not the case at all.
I definitely agree with that. And I actually think that is a problem that still hasn't been solved. And I think that I'm a little 50-50 on this, but my belief is that the stability for future broadcasters is actually going to come from people who move away from that, who are able to, like, for example, subscriptions. Yes, there's a lot of, like, I'm supporting the streamer still sentiment attached to it.
Yeah.
But there is a transaction there. You're getting services and, like, products. You're getting emotes. Yeah. You're getting, like, the little badge that makes you feel like there's a little bit of prioritization. There's a lot of this other stuff. Pure raw donations are still a large part of the ecosystem. But I honestly feel like gradually we're going to start to move away from that a little bit. But right now, like, I remember Nathaniel was actually talking about this on his stream the other day, where it's like, or maybe it was actually, no, it was on the Tasteless podcast. Tasteless podcast has a lot of good stuff now. But Nathaniel was talking about how, like, it's similar to the mobile gaming market, where the phrase is not exactly, like, a nice one, but to say that there are certain whales that support, like, obviously you don't want to call them that, but, like, there are large supporters that make streams possible for a larger portion of people.
Right.
I think that as time goes on, we're hopefully going to find more monetization options, such as advertisements, getting sponsors who are, like, more readily willing to, like, jump in on a lot of these streams, and just, I think also things like subscriptions or things like services that will move away from this donation model that creates a lot of social problems that we've seen.
It's really quite complicated. Like, it sounds like there's almost going to be in the future, because you're never going to get rid of people who are dependent or who only thrive on the interpersonal model.
Totally.
There's always going to be people who want to do that, who don't mind dealing with the potential social awkwardness, or that's the only thing they can do. They can't build a big enough business to actually get sponsors or anything like that.
Yeah.
And people who actually either start off that way, with everything now being so much more acceptable, right? Like, you could actually be like, I'm going to grab 4 people who are somewhat famous. We're going to build a new Twitch channel and want you guys to sponsor it so that we have a studio. Like, that could actually be a pitch now, where I think 10 years ago it absolutely could not be. Like, we're going to have the differences there, but the main problem is always going to be that there is going to be probably at one point millions, but certainly thousands right now of people who are always going to be in the first model. They're always going to be forced to be the people who are like, well, I need your help. If I don't get your individual help, like, I am not going to eat this month.
Yeah.
And you're not really going to be able to step away from that. So it almost always seems like live streaming will always be dependent on the whales.
Yeah, I agree. I think that model is always going to exist. Don't get me wrong. Like, I don't think it's just suddenly going to disappear. Like, a lot of channels that only would subsist off of that are suddenly going to just decide, like, well, I could just not exist anymore. Like, I don't think that's going to be the case. But I'm hoping that we think and create more monetization models that becomes, like, less of a majority. I actually feel like it is the majority of streams these days are the ones that depend on a few very generous people, as opposed to a minority of streams that subsist off of extremely large numbers of, like, donators or contributors in small amounts. I actually feel like that is more rare these days, and I'm hoping that balance shifts.
Interesting. I think it'd be very hard to actually. I don't know if I agree or not. It's really hard to see which one is more popular.
The other thing is, this is actually something I really like about stuff like Patreon. I actually think Patreon because Patreon, there is at least the opportunity to do that kind of, like, this is a service, like, hey, if you donate $1,000 to this Patreon, like, Tastosis will call you every month. Like, as ridiculous as that sounds, like, that is a service. And I think that Tastosis also has a bathwater thing. But, like, there's still at least some degree of the context that it's set up in is that it is you're being given something.
Yeah.
And that sets expectations that is where the end of that is.
Right. Well, the reason I'm like uncertain is because we don't really see how much for 90% of streamers they're actually making from what sources we can guess, especially to put their sub count out. Some of them don't do that once they reach a certain point though, because they realize that it might actually hurt the amount of donations they get or whatever their reasoning might be. But there's actually so much more that goes in. Like once you get to even 300 subscribers, which actually isn't a lot. Like I have 300 subscribers and usually a few more, but if you know how to market yourself, you actually can get some decent sponsorship off of that. So whenever someone that comes into a person who has 300 subs and they slap down $1,000, you might be like, well, that person is whale dependent. Let's put it in that category. When actually that might just be part of, like, that just might be a perk. And they actually are fairly, well, I don't want to say well off, but they survive off of other means that we actually can't see. So that's why true. I'm a little like, I actually don't know if that's necessarily true.
I guess the reason why I say that is I think about Twitch as being, and I guess like streaming in general, as being very top heavy. So the people that we see are oftentimes the one, like the people at the very top are the ones that we see like the really, really large numbers for, right? And usually I think of the people who are, I guess, in like that middle kind of territory. Usually those are the ones that I think are more reliant on like a few generous contributors. I'm not gonna call them whales. Generous contributors.
I think it's okay to use the term whale if you're not just like calling out someone in particular.
I guess
you're a whale.
Am I a whale? Like I have, I think,
I
have.
You've done a lot of.
I have 40. I subbed to 45 different channels, like, and a lot of them are tier 2s. Yeah. Yeah. Don't call me a whale.
Oh, okay. I'm not though. I'm just saying general whales. Anyways, well, it's like it's all very like the more established and the more. I was going to use the word adult, but that's definitely not the right word. The more mature that Twitch gets.
The more adults that Twitch gets.
I mean, there's some problems there as well. Or that live streaming gets. I mean, the more that it is going to have issues with that interpersonal stuff, it's also going to have issues with, like, taxes. There's going to be tons of people who even have 1,000 subs.
Streamers that don't pay taxes?
There's going to be tons of people who still don't know what they're doing tax-wise. And then you also have all these, like, other businesses that are coming up here. So, for instance, you have tournament organizers that are no longer able to just be like, well, I had $1,000 and I gave $1,000 away, so I didn't have $1,000. The government's gonna be like, well, what? Like, but you did, but where did it go? Were you paying other people in America? Are you paying them in Canada? Like, it gets so confusing. It's gonna be it's gonna be a new type of Wild West and not a very pretty one. It's gonna be a logistical Wild West.
Yeah, I know nothing about being paid $24,000, having to pay taxes on it while I paid it out to players. Don't nothing about that.
Oh boy. All right then. Anyways, but it is an interesting topic, and more people are thinking about why, like, individual streamers are even doing as well as they do and whatnot. So for instance, you know, there's the streamers who are either impersonal or they actually have like a really good product. Sure, we talked about that. There's also streamers who choose a community and really integrate themselves into it, like StarCraft personalities. And there's, you know, variety streamers. There's also people who do shows and Critical Role, right? Like, it's gonna be, there's a lot of different ways to be a Twitch streamer or just a streamer in general. But let's focus in on what we know, which is to hook yourself into a community. So kind of combining those two together with the whole day 9 question.
Yeah.
But what do you think of, I guess, people who are forced, like the people who think that they're stuck, I guess, right? Like if you ever wanted to go into other esports, even though you are not always a, how to explain your career, feardragon. You're not always a full-time caster, but you were always casting.
Yeah. We're just gonna say I'm a part-time commentator now.
But still, as a part-time commentator, if you had any interest in being like, well, this works out. Like, I want to do more events. Yeah. But obviously, StarCraft's a little bit limited. I mean, you know, you talked about you think you owe anyone anything if you were to go ahead and just jump on over to Fortnite. But would you actually feel like you were indebted at all to StarCraft, or I guess any community out there?
So I'm gonna say this, and it's gonna come off as negative, and I'll tell you why I think it's a very big positive outlook on things. So, like, I think if I decided after WCS finals or something, like, Sarah loses and I'm so upset, I'm like, you know what? I'm done with StarCraft. Never doing another StarCraft event again. Never watching another stream. I'm unsubbing to everyone and all that stuff. Like, if I decide to do that tomorrow, I think that should be totally okay. I don't think that, I should be able to evaluate every single day whether I want to continue to, like, be involved or, like, create content. And if I want to just jump over to Fortnite or something because I want the money or because I just genuinely have an interest in Fortnite. I've never played a battle royale. I have no interest in Fortnite. But that's, like, the negative side of it. The positive spin on that is that I think that is, in a sense, what most content creators actually do. We don't talk about it, but, like, everyone does evaluate, like, do I want to continue doing this? And that means that all the people you do still see in StarCraft and in whatever other games, like, people are interested in, like, they're there because they want to be there. I will say, as someone who is on part-time for StarCraft, but, like, has full-time in other normal jobs, that the amount of effort that, like, most content creators put in is so disproportionate with the amount of, like, compared to the money that they get paid out, disproportionate compared to the amount of effort they could put into, like, any other normal industry and how much money they would get paid there. They would get paid so much more in other industries. So, like, no one is really in this for just purely the money. There are much better ways to get money.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is certainly a transitionary period when you move from anywhere.
It does hurt. Yeah, and I am a firm believer in the idea that, like, you can make that transition. Like, even now, I think if I have to be careful about saying this because I want to emphasize, I believe it's always possible. I don't believe it's always easy, and I don't believe it's something that you can just say, like, pure through hard work. I think you need to have intelligence. I think you need to have, like, certain, like, attributes to succeed.
Sure.
But, like, I think someone could become, like, a new WCS commentator next year. I think someone, if they worked really hard, they were super intelligent about it, I think someone could become an Overwatch League commentator. Like, I think you could actually break in. Granted, there are, of course, some restrictions. Yeah, and I know, like, I actually know that this is probably something you don't totally see eye to eye with me on. Because I know we've talked about stuff like this similarly. But I think it's possible. There are, of course, certain restrictions of, like, well, for example, BlizzCon is tomorrow. I can't say, I think if you worked really hard, I could commentate BlizzCon tomorrow. Like,
if you work really hard to poison 2 or 3 of the commentators.
Okay, yes, but random person who has not commentated anything for WCS might have a harder time.
Okay.
Anyways, but, like, I think that I think it's possible to, like, break in, but, like, there are a lot of challenges that come with it. Yeah, I think here's the way I would think about it. Breaking into a new game sometimes, if it's not, like, extremely related or there isn't a lot of overlap in audience, it's like a career switch. In the same way, like, if I wanted to go from, like, electrical engineering to, like, software engineering or something, there might be some overlap, but a lot of it's going to be very minimal. For example, if you try to switch over to Fortnite. So you're going to be starting from the ground up, and I think where a lot of people get caught is they get used to a certain standard or expectation of, like, what they're at, and when you switch, that expectation has to be dropped dramatically, like, way further down.
Sure.
And the way that you operate as, like, a business or an entity when you're, like, let's say low is, like, nobody knows you, medium is, like, some people know you, and high is, like, everyone knows you. A lot of people who are high and then switch think that they drop down to, like, medium, but sometimes they're kind of between medium and low.
Okay.
So it's like you have to operate at a different level.
Okay, but then the issue is then, like, if you do change jobs, usually there's an amount of education that's usually dedicated to it. So either 2 or 4 years back into college, or at least some type of extended hardcore program. There's usually, starting from the bottom, but there's also usually so much more that is involved to at least make it so that you can live off of this transition. So usually you have someone that you know that's in the business, or that there is more overlap in the 2 jobs than if you, I know you use, like, 2 engineers as an example, which are very different, but still, but it'd be like you went from never acting in your life as a software engineer and then being like, I'm going to be an actor. Like, that can be such a huge jump.
Yeah.
Right? And you have to find some way to actually make a living off of it. So what, in your mind, actually makes it possible for a Twitch streamer or StarCraft 2 caster or whatever, an esports caster or host, what makes it actually possible for them to transition and yet not just be forced to go and live back with like mom and dad and live in a box or whatever they
If they've already been successful?
Yeah, if they've already been successful.
If you've already been successful, I think then the answer does become a little bit different. And I should also point out the fact that I've never had to do this. So my answer is going to be purely on the theoretical side and like having talked with a few people like Kalaris or something. But like, I think a lot of it is a lot of it is like timing also. If you're going to start diversifying while you still have a lot of job stability where you're at already is, I think, very important. Because if you, let's say, I don't think StarCraft is a good example because I still believe in the future that StarCraft has and everything. But like, let's say, I don't know, Warcraft 3, but back in the day, or like Brood War, but like back sometime where Brood War interest and everything, and like especially in the foreign scene, had started dying off. If never got up there in the foreign scene. So. Yeah. But like, if it's at that point where it's like it's already petering out, then I almost feel like it's already too late to start getting an easy transition. You're already. I actually think at that point you should. If you're so late to the transition that it's like things are already kind of like for bust or whatever, like we already see the end coming, I think at that point you need to start thinking about getting another job at like maybe something unrelated. Maybe it's something like entry level or something just to support yourself while you make that transition. Because I think that stuff does take time and it takes like effort and you're already kind of behind. But if you do catch it and you want to make those kind of transitions early enough, at least in my mind, the way you have to do it is like, a lot of it is if you want to try and hit the ground running as fast as possible, you have to leverage contacts. Like, I think that's actually a huge thing. I am in StarCraft. I literally don't know anyone in Fortnite, but I know team owners and I know players who are on teams with players who play Fortnite and everything. And I have general like contacts, even though I don't know anything about Fortnite. If I wanted to get into Fortnite commentating, I would seriously be well served by contacting a lot of those people, reaching out, trying to get a better jump in, using them to like contact and say like, hey, are there any opportunities to cast things? Like, I think there are ways you can leverage your existing or things to do that. And then also you have the benefit of like demo roles and all that stuff.
So the other interesting thing about esports and streaming compared to just a regular old career switch, goes back to the whole like interpersonal stuff, feeling indebted to the community, is that there is going to be a community bar to an extent. I'm not going to sit here and say that every time ESL hires some kind of random guy for a new mobile game, they are like, well, what if the mobile games community doesn't like this guy? Like, I don't think that's always happening, but considering how many people are clamoring to be on the next big esport, and then also the guys who were there from the beginning and then they got big, like there is always that seemingly random entry bar.
Yeah.
You can't suddenly be in the pulse of the community all of a sudden. Even if you do really great content from the get-go, say if I were to move to Rainbow Six and do like a most amazing content, which I'm not saying I could, it'd still be like, well, these guys were doing, pretty good content for 2 years. So like I think I'm gonna go with them instead.
I agree from the hiring perspective, it is difficult, but like I think I think actually a decent example would maybe be Rapid, because I remember even though you and I were both very in touch with the StarCraft scene and everything, and I do remember thinking like, oh yeah, Rapid, like he did some stuff a really long time ago, I think, like he did some GSL casting, but like I remember the specific day that he did his first GSL cast, and I remember sitting there being like thinking about his voice and like analyzing his casting and everything, and I remember thinking like, this guy's like coming out of nowhere, like just completely out of nowhere. Okay. But I do think like it's possible.
So one quick thing about that though is that it almost is like like category C of getting some jobs is location-based jobs.
That's true.
And that's like, and Rapid could, talk more about it more accurately, but that's probably what it was. Was that he is in Seoul and he has shown any interest in StarCraft or just simply been a part of the organization in other video games. kind of the right place at the right time.
I do agree with that, but I think there is something about that. Like, for example, no airs put on. If I lived in Europe, I wouldn't have been hired for any of Challenger. Like, there's no way Blizzard would have brought me on for Challenger if I lived in Europe. Because location-wise, it made a lot of sense. But, like, in that same vein, there are going to be, like, opportunities that spring up sometimes, depending on where you live. That's kind of just, like, the game we play of life.
Right.
Like, there's always going to be, like, random chance things that are kind of outside of your control. And, like, maybe I decide to get into a game where the scene just isn't really alive in, like, America or something. Maybe that's the next thing, and everyone is in Europe or everyone's in Korea or something. But I think that there's actually a lot of people underestimate. It's not easy. I don't want to phrase it this way. Like, I'm not saying, like, oh, it's just as easy or anything. You have to work a lot harder, but, like, you could, for example, start your own stuff. You could start running your own tournaments. Like, fighting game community is actually a really great example of this, where people just start, like, they say, there are no Super Smash Brothers tournaments near me. I guess I will start the weeklies. Like, they started on a college campus. They leverage resources. You start doing a lot of things that you didn't originally want to do. My example that I use for myself is when I wanted to get into commentary, like, 'cause people always talk about, like, oh, I want to get into casting. Like, hey, let me cast with you. Would you consider letting me cast with you? Like, I've been reached out. I'm sure you've been reached out to. Rifkin, Wardy, like, all these, like, commentators for online tournaments have been reached out to so many times by random people who are like, I want to get into casting. It's like, you can just go put on your own tournaments. Like, it's not easy. You have to find funding or all this other stuff. There's, like, a lot of variables involved, but you can go get that experience yourself. I really believe it.
Interesting. It costs money though, and
you sometimes
it's very possibly already oversaturated.
That is true. I do think that, like, there are ways to, like, for example, reach out to sponsors and all that stuff. And I'm not gonna lie, some of the time you're gonna have to rely on more gullible sponsors like that. And you know what? The way that you pay back that ethically is you just do a really good job and you kill it. Like,
Sure.
They may have gotten into that sponsorship for the wrong reasons, but you can still, like, make it worth their while. Like, that's the way I ethically justify that. But, like, I think there are ways to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's a lot of, like, if you want to have a proof of concept kind of stuff, like, I think that for a lot of different things, easy example, hosting or interviewing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to make a transition from becoming a commentator to, like, a host or interviewer, actually, even forget that. Let's say you're a total rando or something, right? And you want to become that. Yeah, there is a really high bar for being an interviewer at, like, an event, but you can just get a camera and a microphone and start doing interviews like this. You can do interviews through, like, Skype or something with
That's
people
true.
and just get that. You can find ways to get that experience. You can try and reach out to players and say, I want to do a show match for charity. There's no prize money involved, but it'd be really cool if you decide to play. If those players say no, go reach out to some other players. Like, maybe they'll be involved. Maybe you reach down and get some lower level players that are more okay with that stuff. And you say, hey, you guys can stream too, but you just shout out the charity. This will at least give you the opportunity to cast them. You get to, like, have some of that experience and maybe, like, also create a little bit of a highlight reel for yourself that then you can use to pass along. Like, it all builds from, like, a starting block. And I really feel like I am extremely grateful that the two industries I work in, which is esports and software development, I can just go do stuff and, like, create my own experience. Mm-hmm. If I was a chemist or something, I don't know what that looks like, because you need a lab, you need all of these resources. The starting point is you have to have these contacts that you reach out to. Esports, there's no excuse. You can get started on your own with no one else's permission.
So I'm going to do that thing where, like, you're the optimist and I'm the pessimist.
Yeah. Go for it.
I'm also going to start digging into casting, which I don't want to do too much of. I don't think too long, but I also have plans for another video series about casting. But since we're on the topic, do you think that there are any, like, glass ceilings, I guess might be a good word for them, that exist when it comes to this industry, whether it's live streaming or hosting or casting? I mean, it's becoming more and more, like, you know, as I work through it, it looks more and more like being in the entertainment industry. And that's actually what it is nowadays. So are there any soft caps to this potential that you seem to be so optimistic about?
So I wouldn't say that they're glass ceilings. The way I would actually phrase it is I think they're like rubber ceilings, if I had to like pick some other material. What I mean by that is I think you can break through, but like I'm going to use the very real example. Tastosis, right? Considered the best commentary duo in StarCraft.
Right.
I think if you wanted to be considered the best commentator in StarCraft, your goal to like do that is not do Tastosis +1. Because then it's like rubber. They'll kind of like, it stretches up. You kind of have to be higher up enough. You have to like kind of shut up. Oh my God. Can we end the interview? I don't want to.
I was just laughing at the motions you were making. I didn't even think about the rubber
Oh,
comment.
shut up. Oh my God. You're so immature. All right.
Taking another stab at it.
Shut up. Anyways, with this, what's another material I can use? All right. Either way, basically, you can't just be like as good as Tastosis and like a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be enough better that like that difference is recognized, and I think that is what makes it feel like there's a glass ceiling, because you will, let's say if Tastosis is like at 100 and you hit 101, that's like the immediate like I think that I'm a little bit better, but you know it's still pretty even or something, and people through just, is your arm getting tired?
No, I was hot.
Oh, okay. Right, Tastosis. All right, so yeah, Tastosis is at 100. You're at 101.
Yeah,
it's like you kind of understand. Yeah, like not everyone's gonna perceive it that way because Tastosis has that legacy.
Right.
People, it takes time to change people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're like 150, you might kind of feel like I'm a lot better than Tastosis. Why don't people feel that way? But it turns out, like in this example, let's say you actually have to hit like a 200 to overtake Tastosis, because there's that legacy that it takes time to change people's minds. And it's almost just like the idea that Tastosis is you're not actually trying to compete. It feels weird to say this because like competing commentators is something that's really hard to talk about, like when you're competing against your coworkers and stuff. But if you're trying to say I want to become the best commentator, you're not actually trying to compete against Tastosis at whatever level they're commentating at right now. You're competing against the idea of what Tastosis is.
Yeah, absolutely. Which can feel insurmountable because you can't go back to Brood War and start there.
That's true, but I guess if we talk about it in that sense, like, do expectations for what a commentary duo get taken to like such ridiculous levels that it is literally unachievable? That I don't think is true.
Well, Tastosis really is the perfect example because even though, like, and I want to make it clear, like, we're very good friends with them, and I think they're amazing and awesome.
But God, Dan is such a piece of shit, all right? Right?
Says anything, you know, but they are the perfect example because they did make a dynasty in Korea. There's a lot of
soul dynasty, if you will.
Anyways, but there's a lot of talk about the influence that Tastosis has on esports, and not just because they're great commentators. So there is almost like this, like for us specifically, like I just don't even think about trying to compete with them. There's never going to be even though ZombieGrub and Maynard some of the best casting in the whole damn world, like we're never going to be ZombieNard that beats Tastosis. That's just not, I actually genuinely do not think that will ever happen. So it's kind of a perfect example as opposed to the other examples I had in mind. But that one's a perfect example. Like, is it really possible to beat them? Is it really possible to double the quality against some of the best quality in the world? Like, that seems like an impossible task.
The way I would phrase it is, it's kind of, in my mind, it's very similar to actually saying, like, I say it's similar, but there is one key difference I'll talk about in a second, but, like, it's similar to saying, like, can you actually beat Cyril? Can anyone actually, like, defeat Cyril? He's so good, he's, like, it feels like an insurmountable wall a lot of the time, but, like, everyone knows, because in this example, as opposed to the Tastosis one, in the Tastosis one, you were competing against an idea, and that's more ambiguous.
Right.
Whereas Cyril, it's like, doesn't matter anyone's opinion. Cyril starts with the same 12 drones that Snoop does, and, you know, ex Kawaiian does and I do and, you know, random bronze leaguer does, like, right? Serral starts with the same things, and an unambiguous entity is determining whether or not he wins or loses every single time, that doesn't have any opinions based on however good he was before, which is not the case with Tastosis. That is the one kind of big difference, but similar to the Serral example, I still feel like everyone knows that yes, it is theoretically still possible to outplay Serral. Serral makes mistakes like everyone else, and I think that even in that idea of Tastosis, like, the hardest thing that I think would probably be or come with it is that specifically, like, for example, in StarCraft, a lot, because it's such an older, so much older of a game, there's a lot of people who wouldn't watch a lot of your newer stuff if you were trying to just become the best StarCraft commentator. There's a lot of people who don't actually watch StarCraft as much anymore that would still say Tastosis is the best commentary duo. So there would be difficulty with that, but I believe if you gave time and enough effort and intelligence to someone, they could overtake them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to do an argument as an interview.
Yeah. You could argue.
I mean, it's such a far off thing though. It just actually, I listen to you say all
very
this
difficult.
like
Very, very difficult.
You're like, there's this thing and there's that thing and there's also this thing, but trust me, guys, it's also super possible. And you're like,
yeah. I know. It's because I did so much high school debate, so my starting point is always just like, okay, here are the counter arguments, but here's why my argument's better.
I mean, that's fair. You're deciphering your argument and then hopefully still winning against your own argument, which I'm not sure you actually did, but that is your opinion.
Yeah, fair enough.
That you could actually beat Tastosis. Mm-hmm. It's just it's a very, like, that seems like an insurmountable task. It's maybe more fair to say, like, you could go into a bigger esport with 16 main commentators, let's say, and you could probably beat out the bottom 4, and that is super, super reasonable, as opposed to a esport that has, like 8 commentators and has 2 on the top. But anyways, it's still nice to hear, like, some optimism for that, I suppose, even in a very entrenched esport that is StarCraft or anything in general, and that you also think that it's all these skills that are gained from doing esports or live streaming can actually be moved over somewhere else. I mean, it's something that I could debate you on, but it's also refreshing to have that look come out from, because I think if I'm going to do more interviews with more people and kind of bring up some of the same subjects, I think I'm going to have, wildly different answers. I can kind of see where Nate's going to go with this. I can kind of see where Pig's going to go with this. And you are one of the more optimistic guys as the NA cheerleader. That makes a lot of sense in StarCraft. So I'm just going to end it with, like, thank you for the opinions.
Yeah, of course. No problem.
Yeah, and that, everyone wanting to get into StarCraft casting or esports is going to watch us and be like, feardragon will help me. ZombieGrub doesn't probably care. Maybe. But no. I mean, I encourage everyone to try and go for it, whatever it is. But my whole underlying, like, poking and prodding was like, well, how realistic is it, right? Which I was like,
that
you're not going to survive. Can you actually make a living while you're doing all this?
I want to re-emphasize, and this is the thing that I was afraid of, is like, I don't want to give the opinion that this is ever, like, something that's going to be easy. If you wanted to get into becoming, like, a premier WCS commentator and stuff, like, contextually, people, I think, sometimes look at, like, both of us or even, like, Wardy and stuff and be like, oh, well, you guys popped up in, like, 2016, 2017. It's like, hold on, guys. ZombieGrub and I and Wardy, like, all of us have actually been casting StarCraft since, like, 2011 or 2012, I think, for you. Yeah. That's what your WCS lower third said. But I think it was 2011. But, like, so we've been at this for a long time, but at the same time, like, what I'm also talking about is, like, there are some things that, like, I don't want to say you have to be born with, because I don't think it's actually purely that. I think that there is a lot of effort and stuff involved, but it's like, there's a degree of, like, intelligence on how you approach things, which can sometimes be, like, natural raw talent and stuff. If you are just so charismatic, like, Creighton Olsen comes to mind as, like, just naturally super duper charismatic.
Yeah.
he jumped up, and of course location and stuff comes into play and everything,
Sure.
but I mean, it's not like there were just like total vacancies that nobody could fill, so they grabbed this random guy who was really charismatic on interviews, right? Like there are opportunities he's getting over, say like a No Regret or like a Rapid casting or something. And I think like there are natural talent raw things that can happen. And then I think there's another thing, which is like intelligence, which I again think you do have to have, like, you can work on, you can maybe be born with and stuff, but like intelligence, and I don't necessarily mean like how you like approach the game or anything. I mean like in terms of improvement. I think that your rate of improvement can have a really massive impact. And like, if you don't have those, like, and those two things are going to affect how long it'll take you. And there is a reality that, like, as much as I love StarCraft 2, as much as I do believe StarCraft 2020 and all that stuff, some point, maybe it's 2 years from now, maybe it's 5 years from now, maybe somehow StarCraft 2 lasts for 10 years. I'd be very surprised if we lasted for 20 years, but at some point, there's going to be some time limit on this. And if you're like in the 19th year and you want to break in the 20th year, like there's a time limit, right? So there is that as well. And those other factors approach that. Anyways, you were closing up the video.
No, it's all good. I was just like, you are putting some of the realism in there, though.
Yeah,
There definitely are going to be caps, and it's going to be something that you have to acknowledge as like really bummer mode that makes you. But to just like try and expand and make it a nice little thought. I think where you're going with the whole, like, because you keep on saying the cliche, which is like it's not going to be easy, which everyone knows and everyone gets really tired of hearing of. I got tired of hearing that no matter what everything I ever did, like art and esports. When people think of like I'll work really hard, they think purely of like hours they put in. And a lot of people do it without being smart about it. So that's also why you keep saying intelligence. It's not just like, I can do the math well. Me, smart. It's actually more like an emotional and social intelligence that you can read into what is going to be effective for the amount of time that you put in. And that's what's really difficult about it, is that there's a lot of other skills that go into more like marketing or branding and that type of stuff that, you know, most people don't actually specialize in, except like marketing majors, that you have to then realize is actually more so what you have to put in hours to, as opposed to, for instance, laddering until you're Grandmaster. That actually might be the worst thing you can do with your time if you want to be a commentator.
Yeah.
But anyways, I think that's where you're kind of going.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with that.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Like, that's absolutely something that you have to learn, and the faster you learn that, the better off you're going to be. So it is a lot of just, I think like social intelligence is actually like number one for sure. With how you navigate the world that we live in. So Twitch, YouTube, as well as esports. And of course it helps in every other degree and field. But anyways, especially something where you're on camera and you're talking to people and having to navigate the like, I want a favor, but I don't want to be the clingy person type deal. It's really tough.
Yeah, I mean, especially as commentators also, like, I remember one of the things that I had to work on the most was that even though I felt like I got along really well with everyone, like, I didn't have high social intelligence for, like, just being a fun person to interact with. Like, I was nice, but, like, and I'm still working on that to some degree, but, like, especially if you're on camera, like, that is going to be a lot of your job.
Yeah, it is. Well, that was not exactly a super directed interview, but I think we talked about a lot of interesting stuff. I'm glad we touched on casting a little bit, and this is probably the first interview that I actually released, so just like fully out there. Like, I want to do just an entire podcast series on just casting and hosting, kind of, you know, bits of both, but that I really want to dig deep on some of these conversations we had in the last like 20 minutes. But it has been 50 minutes, so let's wrap it up. Thank you very much for your time, feardragon. You can do your shout outs now.
Thanks for having me. You can follow me at LiquidRet on Twitter, but if you don't like that account, then feardragon64 on all social media, because I'm a lot better at branding than ZombieGrub, because I have a really unique name that no one on Earth wants to have, except for me.
Well, to be fair, I took ZombieGrub on my other Twitter account that ended up being my public one. I took it away from myself.
What? All right. But yeah, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, Instagram now. I have an Instagram. Follow me so that I get more followers than my sibling and I can rub it in their face. But yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, definitely make sure to check them out. And please follow the channel, guys. I will see you later for more interviews. Bye bye.